So this is honestly quite a sad story because I covered this story originally back when this cheesemaker was talking about having troubles. This was back early, oof, what, 20, I believe 17, I think it might have been 18, but I think it was round about that time. And not too surprisingly, he was talking about, he'd lost sales, he couldn't sell stuff to the EU because if he did, the customer at the other end might have to pay, the fee. They might say, no, we're not paying it. They would refuse it. It was just all chaos. Then you had the added cost of the paperwork. It just made it not worth it. And at the end of the day, as far as we're aware of this guy at the moment, he sold it. He sold his business, as we'll see in a moment, because of these tariffs, because of the tariffs that were put in by this deal. Now, the deal that has been now done by Starmer, the EU deal, helps a lot. And we're going to do two videos in this. We're going to do this one by the cheesemaker, and then we're going to cover another food and drink company that is absolutely loving it. They're like, excellent, finally, progress means I don't have to spend a lot of money on tariffs. And you're going to see, I think, the difference between these two. And it is, as well, we always said, the difference between the small SMEs and the larger companies. The larger companies always going to have sort of the more money, the staff, the personnel to be able to handle it. The SMEs, maybe not so much. So, a sad tale indeed, but maybe for other UK cheesemakers, certainly with the EU deal, probably quite welcome. So before we get on into this, please do remember to click on the like, share, and subscribe button down below. Of course, there's the Patreon page, there's the Buy Me Coffee link where you can buy me coffee, the YouTube thank you button, and of course, as always, there's the Pony Club down below as well. And 'tis Wednesday too, so there will be a Pony Club. We'll be talking about some slippage that went on recently. So if you are part of the Pony Club or the Patreon, you will get to see that. If you want to see that video, like I say, down below, and of course you'll gain access to all the other content I've made as well. So let's crack on into this. Oh boy, this is a real sad tale. So UK cheesemaker welcomes new EU deal but says it comes 4 years too late. A British cheesemaker who was forced to sell his business because of a £600,000 loss caused by Brexit red tape has now welcomed the new deal with Brussels, but says it came 4 years too late. Simon Spurrell, who made headlines when he highlighted now the prohibitive exporting costs after the UK's exit from the single market, said, of course, he was delighted that the grown-ups are now back in the room and that he will now consider relaunching his business as long as the details are confirmed. He said it was good news, but we have had this but we could have had this from day one. It is just such a shame it has taken so long when we could have had this in 2020, he said. And that's the biggest thing. That is the biggest thing we have seen on this. We could have had this in 2020. A deal that every single company right now, if you look at all UK companies, they're like, yes, this is great. Bring it on. More of this, please. Of course, Boris Johnson, of course, up in arms about this. And don't worry, we'll be doing Daniel Hanan's crying about this probably on Thursday. So look forward for that one. But anyway, back to this. So his company's, of course, business model was completely upended overnight after under the hard Brexit deal sealed by Boris Johnson, with just 20% of sales revenue disappearing immediately. What did we say? The big thing we were noticing at the time when we were covering a lot of these companies, it was between 20 and 30% of their business gone like that. Just gone. If you're a business and you're losing that amount of money, that is a lot to lose, because that 20-30% represents hundreds of thousands of pounds in lost business. That's you not hiring anyone, you're not expanding your company, you're not maybe developing new products. There are consequences for losing that amount of of like revenue. The former prime minister, of course, decided to reject the EU's offer of a Swiss deal, obliviating any needs now for veterinary certification, and of course on food, including red meat, poultry, and shellfish, because it would have meant the UK now aligning itself with EU rules. A version, of course, the Swiss deal with the most cytary and cytosanitary checks was now eliminated, is now back on the table with the hopes that it can be concluded within a year. So we are going back to this Swiss style deal. This is now on the table. This is going to be good. And of course, we'll be aligning with EU rules on this. Every single company in the food industry wanted to align on EU rules on this. But apparently, oh no, it's a surrender. It's a surrender. Anyway, Brexit, of course, meant that Spurrell faced charges of £180 per veterinary certification on retail orders for the continent, even on packs of cheese just worth £35. As you can see there, it's not worth it. Why on earth would you send cheese that's, has a price tag of £35 where you've got to pay £180 per one you send? That is just completely eliminating any profit whatsoever. It makes it pointless to even send stuff. Initially, of course, Spurrell had committed to a £1 million expansion now for growing his Cheshire Cheese Company, tried to at least get around these trade barriers by considering even warehousing the cheese now on the continent. But those costs were prohibitive. He sold now to a large business who had a distribution center in the Netherlands and a legal entity now to export it in Germany. They were exporting it to themselves. It, of course, still meant that the UK was losing out. They have to pay a 5% corporate tax and a 20% VAT now to the Germans. And, of course, the transport costs have to be paid to the Dutch. So the margins are tight. This deal potentially does away with that, but we will have to wait and see if it includes no checks on orders now for individual customers, he said. And that is the big one. Because they're doing big consignments, basically selling the cheese to themselves, and then they're doing, the rest of the selling to Europe. It is that individual customer selling that we will have to wait and see, because that will affect a lot of businesses. If you can then go, oh, great, these checks don't affect individual items, that opens up a whole now range of opportunities for UK businesses. So we will have to see. Back to this. So even if not, of course, this is huge news for small and medium-sized businesses, he said. Our biggest consumer market was the 27 neighboring countries that we lost and is now open again. This is, of course, for small producers that lost out from Brexit. The biggest companies in the supermarket chain were always able to shoulder the costs. Again, as we said on that, we can now, of course, stop fishing in this small pond and cast our nets out wider again. Everybody has now been waiting for this to happen. Just thank heavens the grown-ups are now back in the room instead of the people trying to make the EU to be the bad guys when it is the British government who cut us out of the market in the first place and rejected the original SPS deal. Exactly. He went on to add all the Tories were interested in was the soundbite and the saber rattling, not British businesses. And that, I think, does the Tories even worse damage, because for a party meant to be about British business and British enterprising, the Labour government's just done something that is massively favourable to a lot of small and medium-sized businesses, the SMEs. Who is the party now of small business? Certainly not the Tories. Back in, of course, 2021, the first year now of the Brexit trading operations, Spurrell lost over £240,000 in wholesale and consumer business now in Europe, where he was looking to hold at least another £350,000 now the following year before now deciding to sell up. So just unsustainable. Just unsustainable if you are making that level of loss on that. He said now the alliance with Joseph Heller, a now much larger concern, offered more strategic means to deal now with the costly Brexit trade barriers. If you are large enough, you can, of course, mitigate the cost increase because of the cost of paperwork for one pallet of cheese can at least be spread across over 100 pallets. It will be very be very beneficial to all customers in the EU because they can get now a local delivery rate, he added. Spurrell also said the deal, which was undertaken for an undisclosed sum, was also great news now for his workforce. All the head office production and warehousing staff will be able to be retained, while additional 14 now fund full and part-time jobs will now be created. Shocking. Shocking. But everything we predicted, exactly right there. What I was said. If you can't do that, why have staff in the UK? You know, he sold to a larger firm to avoid all that stuff. And yeah, the larger firm can do that. And we've always been saying that. The larger companies for Brexit, yeah, it will cost them, but they can absorb it in some way, shape, or form, even if they are passing it on to the consumer at the end of all it at some way. But the small, medium enterprises, not so much. So, hey, good news. And does it solve all the problems of Brexit? No. But it's a start. And one thing you can definitely see him say that the adults are now back in the room. They've done a good deal. They've done a good deal on this. But as I said, still the details to hammer out. If you've seen a lot of other talking about those the big stuff, but now it's also down to the details. This is where we've now got to start, dotting the I's and crossing the T's, as they say. So we'll see what happens in that phase and in that process. But everything that has been announced so far, hey, that's good. It's a good direction to go in. And I've always said you get to a point where you're like, hey, this is Brexit. This is as best as it's ever going to be. As you can see, companies want to work. They want to be part of the EU. Look at all these examples of where we've worked with the EU, where we've been part of it, where we follow all their rules and your regulations. What's the big deal when it benefits the country so much? Are you really sure you want to, continue with Brexit? Yeah, not so much. So, as always, thank you very much for watching. And of course, as always, let me know what you think down below in the comments, and we'll see you all next time.